So far, Bitcoin is behaving perfectly in line with what we predicted. It's just found resistance on the EMA 50 on the daily, and this in turn increases the chances that we'll reach this zone of interest. And in this episode, we'll take a good look at the ideal scenario for Marathon this week. A scenario that would render us an immensely attractive risk to reward. And to those of you who may not know, the reason why we obsess so much about Marathon Digital Holdings is because it is a Bitcoin mining company. And hence, when Bitcoin trends in a bullish fashion, we can rightly expect Marathon to vastly outperform that of Bitcoin's spot price. Now, as discussed in the previous episodes, the ideal scenario for Bitcoin would be to move slowly down towards this support of the ascending channel. This in turn should align with the EMA 100 on the daily, but what I'm mainly keeping an eye on is for the lower bullish red. If Bitcoin were to actually end up in this zone, whilst at the same time making a clear lower bullish red closing on the daily RSI, then folks, I might just sell that kidney of mine. Now, the last episode was produced somewhere around here, and in that episode we talked about the likelihood of Bitcoin going up to test either of these resistance lines. And that's exactly what's happened since, as Bitcoin got rejected by the EMA 50 on the 4-hour chart. And since its recent all-time high a couple of weeks back, Bitcoin has made a series of lower highs. And if we throw to the mix a still very weak RSI on the 4-hour chart, and mind you, these here are not lower bullish red touches, they're just too far away, the technical map more than ever speaks in favor of a plunge down to this very zone. And if we move on to the 1-hour chart, Bitcoin has gotten rejected time and again by the EMA 50 and EMA 100. It hasn't thus managed to reach the EMA 200, yet with that said, that's usually the last one in line to be tested. In this sense, I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see something like this, at which Bitcoin will be rejected by the EMA 200 on the 1-hour before it finally plunges down. So all in all, in Bitcoin, things continue to look weak on the daily, 4-hour and 1-hour chart, and I'm more convinced than before that we'll actually end up reaching this zone. Naturally, that doesn't mean it will happen, but from a probabilistic point of view, things sure do look good. Let's then move on to the star of the show, Marathon Digital Holdings. Marathon is currently trading at the diagonal support trend line. This line is based on the weekly chart, so whatever we see on the daily chart is not an accurate representation. Now, given that Bitcoin still has another few percent to the downside, the ideal scenario for Marathon, given that it were to happen within this very week, would be for Marathon to go down to around $44 and then recover back up at or above the diagonal trend line again. And mind you, this is if it were to happen prior to Friday's closing. If, however, Marathon were to go down to this level yet not manage to retrace all the way back up, now that, folks, would be a worrying sign. With that said, you may wonder why $44 specifically is the area that we keep an extra eye on. First of all, based on the daily chart, Marathon began its bullish trading from this pivotal bottom in late July, up on which is found regular support on the EMA 50 or the EMA 100. Never again has it tested the EMA 200, and neither should it, because that would be too soon, at least from a statistical point of view. For look here, we already had 2 touches here, and if you look at any trending stock or equity, you rarely if ever see it retesting the EMA 200 with a high frequency. From that it starts its actual trending, which in this case is from here. Now, based on the fact that we've obsessed about lately, the fact that Bitcoin does look weak in the short term and that we do expect it to reach this zone, which in turn would be a confluence zone for many altcoins and their primary trend lines, and for more on this, please watch last week's episodes, it naturally follows that if Bitcoin were to go down and test the support of this ascending channel, we should expect at least some reaction in Marathon as well. And as we don't expect it to test the EMA 200, we take a look at the next one in line, and namely the EMA 100, and that one perfectly coincides at the $44 level. But not only that, for if we proceed to the 4-hour chart on Marathon, we can see that the EMA 200 coincides perfectly with that very level. All in all, if Bitcoin were to go down to this level and Marathon in turn were to test its EMA 100, it is pivotal that Marathon recovers and closes at or above the weekly primary trend line. And if it doesn't, if Bitcoin for example were to just plunge through this channel support, and if alts in turn were to collectively plunge through their primary trend lines, then that would be a completely different story. But as we don't know what's gonna happen, the only thing we can do is to set ourselves up for the ideal risk to reward spots, and in this sense, this here would be an ideal buying spot, one with a very low risk. For if we were to find a bounce here, then I expect us to move towards new all-time highs. And what that in turn would do for the risk to reward, I leave for you to figure out yourself.